A brutal racist officer shockingly put his heavy boot on a black teen's neck in a sickening display of force. He instantly froze and went silent when he realized the teen's father was the police union president. The siren's wail cut through the humid night air like a blade, bouncing off the walls of shuttered shops and empty bus stops. Blue and red lights pulsed against rain-damp concrete, painting the street in flashes of accusation. "Hands where I can see them!" Sergeant Cole Rayner roared, his voice hard and impatient. The teen didn't move fast enough for his liking. In 2 long strides, Rayner was on him, yanking him down onto the asphalt. "I said hands up!" I didn't do anything!" Marcus Hale stammered, his words breaking against the pavement as his cheek met gravel. The force knocked the breath out of him. His backpack hit the ground beside him, spilling tubes of paint and sketch pads across the road. Rayner's heavy boot came down on the back of his neck before he could lift his head. "Quiet!" the officer snapped, pressing harder. Marcus's body jerked as his lungs strained. "You fit the description of a suspect. Keep still. I can't breathe. Please, I can't." "Then stop resisting," Rayner barked, leaning his full weight onto the boy. A few feet away, his partner, Officer Clay, kept his flashlight trained on Marcus's back, his jaw clenched, but silent. The hum of the patrol car's engine filled the small silence that followed, until the sound of something rolling broke it. A paintbrush clattered across the asphalt, landing near Rayner's boot. The sergeant glanced down, frowning. "What's this? You tagging walls, kid?" Marcus tried to lift his head, his voice trembling. I was painting at the community center. I'm not—" "Yeah? And I'm the mayor," Rayner interrupted, twisting his knee. Marcus's gasp was sharp, strained. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed, and a voice called out, "Hey! Let him go, man!" It came from across the street, a man in a hoodie, phone raised, camera light blinking. Another bystander joined him, then another, the air thickening with tension. Clay shifted uneasily. "Sarge," he murmured, glancing at the growing crowd. "They're filming." "Let them," Rayner said, his tone dripping disdain. "They'll see what happens when you don't follow orders." But Marcus wasn't moving anymore. His chest heaved, shallow and uneven. His eyes darted toward the small blue inhaler that had fallen from his pocket, just inches from his fingertips. He reached weakly toward it, but Rayner's boot pressed down harder. "Don't reach for anything!" Rayner barked, mistaking desperation for defiance. Marcus wheezed, the words barely audible now. "It's my inhaler." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. "Yeah, right. You think I'm stupid?" The crowd began to murmur louder, the distant whine of another siren echoing faintly in the background. Someone shouted, "He's just a kid!" But Rayner tuned it out. Years on the force had taught him to see faces as threats, movements as danger, excuses as lies. And yet, beneath that hardened surface, something flickered, an irritation, not guilt, but the faint awareness that this was spiraling too far. Marcus coughed violently, his breath catching. His mind spun in flashes. The mural he'd been working on, the promise he'd made to finish it for the kids at the center, the way his father's voice always told him to stay calm, to comply. "Do what they say, son. Keep your hands visible. Come home safe." But what did compliance matter when you were already on the ground? His vision blurred at the edges. The world seemed to tilt and fade between bursts of light from phone cameras and the hard rhythm of his heartbeat. "Call an ambulance!" someone yelled. Rayner's voice cut through, sharp and defiant. "He's faking it!" He cuffed Marcus's wrists behind his back with a metallic snap. Clay swallowed hard. "Sarge, he doesn't look good." Rayner ignored him, radioing in with exaggerated calm. "Dispatch, we've got a suspect in custody. Possible 10 to 32, resisting arrest." His voice lowered. "Send another unit, crowd control." Then, softer, almost to himself, "Kids these days think they can mouth off and play victim." Marcus tried to speak again, each syllable weaker than the last. "Please, call my dad." Rayner bent closer, his breath hot against the boy's ear. "You don't get to make demands," he hissed. "You're lucky I don't." "Cole," Clay snapped suddenly, his composure cracking. "Look at him. He's not breathing right." The sergeant turned, frustration flaring. "You want to take over, rookie?" But before Clay could answer, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the night, a low hum growing louder. For a split second, Rayner's confidence faltered. Backup, maybe, or maybe not. The growing buzz from the bystanders' phones made him uneasy. He forced himself to look unfazed, but his eyes darted to the cameras, now catching every movement. He could already imagine the headlines. His chest tightened, not with remorse, but with the first spark of fear that this might follow him home. "Get up!" he barked, though Marcus couldn't hear him. He yanked the boy by the arm, dragging him toward the curb. Marcus's legs gave out. His breath came in short, panicked bursts. The inhaler still lay on the ground, its blue casing reflecting the flashing lights. "Leave it," Rayner said coldly when Clay reached for it. "He'll get medical when we book him." One of the bystanders stepped closer, anger replacing fear. "That's police brutality." Rayner's hand went instinctively to his holster. "Back up!" The man stopped instantly, hands raised, but the crowd's tone shifted, from fear to fury. Phones rose higher, voices grew louder. "You're killing him," one shouted. "Let him breathe," another screamed. Through the noise, Marcus's mind drifted. The pain in his chest blurred into numbness, the heat of the pavement becoming distant. He thought of his father again, of the framed commendations lining their hallway, the way Elijah Hale's name carried weight at every precinct in the city. He thought of how proud he used to be of that badge. And somewhere deep inside, he felt a bitter irony, how that same badge had made him a target tonight. "Please," he whispered, the words barely escaping. "Call my dad." Clay froze. "What did he say?" Rayner snorted. "He said to call his daddy." "Cute." He knelt down, gripping Marcus's shoulder. "Sure, kid. Maybe he can bail you out." As he stood, cuffing the boy tighter, a new sound rose. The sharp ping of a notification, followed by another and another. The first video had gone live, streaming to thousands within seconds. The irony was lost on Rayner, but the city's clock had just started ticking. Marcus lay motionless, the sirens from distant units echoing like an omen. One of the bystanders whispered, "That boy's gonna die if they don't stop." Another replied quietly, "They'll stop when it's too late." A heavy silence followed, punctuated only by Marcus's labored breaths and the soft hum of recording phones. The world had narrowed to a single street, a single mistake, a single life balanced between injustice and consequence. Rayner looked down once more, expression unreadable. For a flicker of a moment, he seemed uncertain, haunted even. Then he shook it off, muttering, "He brought this on himself." Marcus's fingers twitched once toward the inhaler, then stilled. What Rayner didn't know, what would soon tear the entire city apart, was that Marcus's father, Captain Elijah Hale, was not just a police officer, but the sitting president of the city police union. The ride to the station was silent except for the faint hum of the cruiser's engine and the sound of Marcus's shallow breathing. The cuffs bit into his wrists. The air inside the car smelled faintly of sweat and metal, sterile, unforgiving. Through the half-open window, flashes of blue and red lights painted his reflection across the glass. Each flicker made his ribs ache, a dull reminder of where Rayner's knee had pinned him to the ground. "Don't fall asleep," Rayner muttered from the driver's seat without looking back. His voice was calm, almost casual, as if this were routine. "You pass out in here, that's paperwork I don't need." Marcus didn't respond. His throat was raw, his chest burned. In the passenger seat, Officer Clay sat stiffly, watching the boy through the rearview mirror. He'd joined the force just a few months earlier, young enough to still flinch at the sound of handcuffs, still believing the badge meant protection. But tonight had cracked something in him. The crowd, the cameras, the silence that followed. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. "You sure we don't need to call paramedics?" he asked, his voice low. Rayner's eyes flicked toward him briefly, sharp and irritated. "He's fine. Probably just scared himself into a panic attack. They all do." Clay opened his mouth to argue, then shut it. He turned his gaze back to the windshield, jaw tight. When they pulled into the precinct lot, the world outside felt eerily still. The night air carried the faint hum of traffic, but the streets beyond were glowing with the light of phone screens and distant sirens. The video had already escaped into the wild, an image impossible to contain. Inside the station, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows over tired faces. The desk sergeant, an older man named Lieutenant Dorsey, glanced up as the trio entered. He frowned at the sight of Marcus's limp frame. "What's this?" "Resisting arrest," Rayner said flatly, tugging Marcus by the arm. "Possible burglary suspect." Picked him up near 83rd, and Madison Dorsey took the clipboard, eyes scanning the arrest form. "Name?" "Marcus Hale," Clay said before Rayner could answer. The lieutenant's pen stopped mid-stroke. "Wait." He looked up slowly. "Did you say Hale?" "Yeah," Rayner said with a shrug. "Why? You know him?" Dorsey's expression hardened. "You mean Captain Elijah Hale's kid?" "The Union president?" Clay's head snapped toward him. Rayner blinked. "You're joking." Dorsey shook his head. "Not unless there's another Marcus Hale living in this city with a father who runs the police union." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You'd better hope that's not the same kid." For the first time that night, Rayner hesitated. His confidence cracked just slightly as he looked down at the bruised boy now slumped against the counter. The room seemed to shift, the hum of chatter fading, the air growing heavy. Marcus raised his head weakly, eyes bloodshot. He's my dad." Rayner's throat went dry. "You're lying," Dorsey sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I'll make a call." "But if this is true—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The implication hung there like smoke. Clay took a half step back, his pulse quickening. He'd seen officers lose their jobs before, but not like this. Not someone like Rayner. As Dorsey dialed the number, Rayner forced a chuckle. "Relax, it's not a big deal. The kid was out past curfew, looked suspicious. His old man will understand protocol." But his words rang hollow, and even he knew it. 2 rings, 3. Then the call connected. Dorsey's voice dropped into something formal, almost nervous. "Captain Hale?" "Sir, you need to come to the station." There was a pause, then a deep, measured voice on the other end. "Why?" Dorsey hesitated, glancing at Marcus. "It's about your son." The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Then came Hale's reply. Calm, clipped, but edged with a quiet fury. "I'll be there in 10 minutes." The line went dead. Rayner swallowed hard, forcing a smirk to mask the unease creeping up his spine. "Well," he muttered, "guess we'll get to meet the man himself." But Clay didn't laugh. He just stared at Marcus, who sat slumped on the bench, his wrists still bound, his breathing shallow. He could almost feel the weight of what was coming, something larger than a complaint, something that could crack the department from the inside. When the station doors burst open 9 minutes later, it was like a shift in gravity. Captain Elijah Hale strode in, his presence commanding, his dark suit still crisp from a late-night board meeting. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but his face was unreadable. Calm, focused, dangerous in its composure. The entire room fell silent. "Where is my son?" he asked. The tone wasn't loud, but it carried like thunder. Dorsey straightened immediately, pointing toward the holding area. "In the back, sir." He's hurt." Rayner tried to step forward to speak, but Elijah's gaze cut straight through him. It wasn't rage, it was colder than that. Something measured, restrained, as if he were fighting to stay in control. Marcus lifted his head when he saw him. "Dad?" His voice cracked. Elijah's breath hitched for the briefest moment. He crossed the room, the echo of his shoes sharp against the tiled floor. When he reached the cell, he froze. His son's face was bruised, one eye swollen, wrists marked red. A dozen words formed in his mind, but none escaped his lips. Behind him, Rayner shifted uncomfortably. "Captain Hale, Elijah turned slowly, his eyes locking onto the sergeant's. "You." Rayner straightened his posture instinctively. "Sir, the kid was resisting." "Don't," Elijah said quietly. The single word silenced him. Clay looked down, guilt spreading across his face. He'd seen what had happened. He'd stood there, and now the weight of that choice pressed against his conscience like a stone. Elijah stepped closer to the desk, placing both hands flat on the counter. His voice stayed calm, but the undercurrent of danger was unmistakable. "Open the cell." Dorsey hesitated. "Captain, maybe we should—" "Now." "Now." The click of the key sliding into the lock echoed like a gunshot. Marcus stumbled into his father's arms, his breath shaky. Elijah steadied him, his jaw tightening at the bruises across his neck. The marks were unmistakable. "Who did this?" he asked, though he already knew. Rayner opened his mouth again, but the words faltered under Elijah's glare. "You want to talk about resisting?" "Let's talk about restraint," Elijah said. His voice remained measured, but there was steel beneath every syllable. "My son weighs 140 pounds. You're a trained officer, and you put your boot on his neck." Rayner tried to deflect. "He matched a suspect description, sir." It was standard procedure. "Standard procedure?" Elijah's voice rose, the mask cracking for the first time. "Since when does standard procedure involve cutting off a child's air supply?" The room was utterly still. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Clay took a step forward, his voice trembling. "Sir, he didn't—" Elijah turned his gaze toward him. "You watched." Clay swallowed. "I tried to—" "You watched," Elijah repeated, quieter this time, and that was somehow worse. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Elijah straightened. His composure returned, colder now, sharper. He turned to Dorsey. "I want every report, every body cam, every statement filed tonight, on my desk by sunrise." Dorsey nodded quickly, eyes wide. "Yes, sir." Elijah looked back at Rayner, who stood frozen in place, the confidence he'd carried hours earlier now replaced by unease. "You think you understand this system," Elijah said softly. "You think the badge shields you from consequence. But you just made the biggest mistake of your life." Rayner's jaw tensed. "Sir, Elijah cut him off, stepping closer until they were nearly face to face. "You just declared war on the wrong man." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The irony was inescapable. Elijah Hale, the man who had spent decades defending officers like Rayner, shielding the department from scandal, had now become the enemy of his own creation. The very silence he had built to protect the system had turned inward, suffocating his own family. And as he guided Marcus toward the exit, the precinct behind them fell into stunned quiet, an institution about to face the reckoning it had long postponed. The irony hung heavy. He had spent years shielding officers like Rayner from discipline. Now his silence had come home to haunt him. Under the harsh flicker of fluorescent light, Elijah Hale sat alone at his office desk, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The phone on his desk buzzed again, its fifth call in 10 minutes. "Ignore it," he murmured to himself. But the buzzing persisted, louder, sharper, drilling into the silence until he finally slammed his hand down and answered. "Elijah, this is Chief Darden," came the strained voice on the other end. "We need to talk before you do anything foolish." "There's nothing to discuss," Elijah replied, his tone level but cold. "The report is already with the press." A stunned pause filled the line. "You leaked an internal investigation file?" Darden hissed. "Do you realize what that means for us?" "For us?" Elijah repeated softly. "You mean for you." He hung up before Darden could respond. Outside, the city had turned restless. Through his office window, he could see a sea of protesters flooding Main Street, their voices merging into a single chant that pulsed like a heartbeat. Justice for Marcus. Justice for Marcus. The sight both terrified and fortified him. He had spent 2 decades preaching order and restraint, telling families that the system works. Now that same system had left his son bleeding on a concrete floor. He rose, adjusted his tie, and stared at his reflection in the dark window pane. The man staring back looked like a stranger, his eyes red-rimmed, his posture rigid, his face lined not by age but by guilt. He barely noticed when his assistant entered quietly. "Sir," the young officer said hesitantly. "The mayor's office called again. They're asking for a private meeting." Elijah shook his head. "No more private meetings. If they have something to say, they can say it in daylight." The assistant nodded but hesitated at the door. "Sir, I heard Rayner's been assigned leave with pay. They're saying it's temporary, but—" Elijah's silence cut him off. The veins in his hand twitched against the desk. "Temporary," he repeated. "That's what they said about every other case, too." Across town, Sergeant Rayner sat in his dim kitchen, his phone glowing beside a half-empty glass of whiskey. His lawyer's voice crackled through the speaker. "You'll need to lay low for a few days, Tom." the union's preparing a statement. Don't talk to anyone, especially the media. Rayner swallowed hard. He's the deputy commissioner's son. What are the chances he lets this go? A long sigh. If he was any other man, I'd say 0. But you've got friends in high places. The department protects its own. Always has. But even as his lawyer spoke, Rayner's confidence was unraveling. His name was trending across every major platform. Reporters were parked outside his home. Former colleagues stopped answering his calls. And then, the bomb dropped. Elijah's leak. When the internal report surfaced online, it painted a chilling picture. 5 prior complaints, 2 hospitalizations, 1 suspect left paralyzed, all dismissed under insufficient evidence. Every headline screamed corruption. Every comment burned with outrage. By morning, City Hall was in crisis mode. At the hospital, Marcus lay awake, tubes snaking from his arms. The rhythmic beep of machines filled the sterile room. He scrolled through his phone with trembling hands, watching clips of protesters holding signs with his name. He didn't want this. He never wanted to be a symbol. He just wanted to paint, to breathe, to be unseen. When the door creaked open, his father entered, the weight of sleepless nights etched into his face. "You should be resting," Elijah said quietly. Marcus didn't look up. "Dad, you have to stop this." Elijah moved closer, resting a hand on the bed rail. "Stop what?" "All of it, the press, the protests. I can't even close my eyes without hearing my name shouted outside." His voice broke. "I didn't want a war." Elijah's gaze softened but remained steady. "You didn't start this, son." "They did." Marcus turned his face away, tears blurring his vision. "Then maybe you shouldn't have spent your life defending them." The words hit Elijah harder than any public attack could. For the first time in his career, he had no defense, no speech prepared, just silence. That night, his office became a battlefield of conscience. Files spread across the table, old case reports he had once dismissed with a signature. He read them now like confessions, each one whispering the same question. How many chances did you give men like Rayner? He didn't notice the time slipping by until his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Elijah," came a rough, tired voice. "It's Rayner." Elijah froze. "You shouldn't be calling me." "I just want to talk," Rayner said quickly. "This has gone too far." "You and I both know how the media twists things. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Elijah's tone sharpened. "You pressed your boot against my son's neck." "I didn't know who he was," Rayner pleaded. "It was chaos out there. He resisted dying," Elijah interrupted. His voice was calm now, almost eerily so. "That's what you call resistance?" A silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then Elijah's voice dropped to a whisper. "You'll answer for this, Rayner. I promise you." He ended the call and stared at the city skyline, lights blinking like faint, guilty eyes. By morning, chaos had a schedule. Reporters gathered outside police headquarters. The department's PR team scrambled to craft a response, but Elijah beat them to it. He scheduled a press conference for noon and refused to disclose the topic. Inside, whispers rippled through the hallways, some calling him brave, others calling him a traitor. As the hour approached, Elijah stood behind the podium, cameras flashing in a blinding storm. He could feel the weight of every stare, every question unasked. The air smelled of tension and disinfectant, 2 things the department had never lacked. He began slowly. "For 23 years I've served this city and this badge," he said, voice steady but low. "I believed that loyalty meant silence. That protecting the department meant protecting justice. I was wrong." The room fell still. Even the hum of cameras seemed to pause. He continued, "The man who assaulted my son should have been removed years ago." But each time, reports disappeared, witnesses were pressured, and the truth was buried. "I buried it." His throat tightened. "No more." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One reporter called out, "Deputy Commissioner, are you saying the department deliberately covered for officers accused of misconduct?" Elijah looked up, eyes blazing with conviction. "I'm saying the department covered for me, for my silence." In a nearby precinct lounge, Rayner watched the broadcast unfold on a muted TV. His hands trembled. The union lawyers had promised protection, but now the deputy commissioner himself was tearing down the walls they hid behind. Rayner stood abruptly pacing. His phone buzzed again, messages from colleagues, some furious, some terrified. One, however, chilled him completely. They're reopening every case you ever touched. The press conference spread like wildfire. By evening, state investigators arrived at the precinct, sealing off records. Officers whispered in hallways, shredding papers, deleting emails, some even turning on each other. The code of silence was cracking, and every man inside knew it. Meanwhile, Elijah sat alone in his car outside the hospital, hands trembling on the steering wheel. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he'd done the right thing. Justice had a cost, and tonight, it wore his badge. A soft knock startled him. Marcus stood at the passenger window, leaning on crutches, pale but determined. Elijah lowered the glass. "You should be resting." "I saw what you did," Marcus said. "The press conference." Elijah nodded, unsure what to expect. Marcus managed a faint smile. "You did the right thing." For the first time in days, Elijah's breath caught with something like relief. "Maybe," he said softly, "but it's not over yet." As Marcus turned to leave, Elijah's phone buzzed once more, unknown number again. He hesitated before answering. "Elijah Hale?" a stern voice said. "This is Agent Crawford with the State Bureau of Investigation. We need you to come down to headquarters immediately. There's been a development." Elijah's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of development?" A pause, heavy and deliberate. "The bodycam footage from Rayner's unit. Someone tried to erase it, but we recovered a partial file. You'll want to see this for yourself." The line went dead. Elijah sat frozen, the engine silent, the world around him narrowing to a single thought. Whatever that footage showed, it wasn't over, not yet. He started the car, headlights slicing through the rain, and drove toward the truth waiting in the dark. He arranged a press conference, one that would change the department forever. Rain fell in thin, nervous lines over the courthouse steps, slicking the marble beneath a restless crowd. Reporters jostled for position, microphones raised like bayonets. Inside the press hall, the hum of whispered speculation filled the air, every eye fixed on the empty podium that stood beneath the city's emblem. A hush fell when Elijah Hale entered. His polished shoes echoed against the tile, each step measured, heavy with purpose. He wore his full dress uniform, medals glinting under fluorescent light, but there was no triumph in his posture, no pride in his chest. His face was drawn, his jaw locked in quiet resolve. Behind him, 2 aides rolled in Marcus's wheelchair. The boy's face was pale but alert, his eyes following his father as he moved to the podium. The air thickened with expectation. A reporter shouted from the back, "Deputy Commissioner Hale, are you stepping down?" Elijah didn't answer right away. He adjusted the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, almost too quiet. "Before I say anything, I want to be clear. This isn't about one officer or one act of violence. This is about years of silence." A ripple moved through the crowd. Camera lights flared to life. He continued, each word deliberate. "I have worn this badge for 23 years. I have sworn an oath to protect and serve. But in that time I learned that silence can be the most dangerous weapon of all. My silence allowed injustice to survive inside the walls I was supposed to defend." He paused, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus looked down, gripping the armrest of his chair. He could feel the tremor in his father's voice, not fear, but the weight of truth. Elijah inhaled deeply, steadying himself. "My silence cost my son his peace," he said quietly, his voice cracking. "And it nearly cost him his life." Flashes erupted from the audience. A murmur rolled through the room like thunder. He didn't flinch. "I led a union that claimed to protect fairness," he went on, his tone tightening, "but fairness became a shield for misconduct. We buried complaints under paperwork. We called corruption procedure. We called loyalty brotherhood. I called it service." He lifted his gaze, meeting the cameras head on. But it was complicity. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then a question cut through the silence. "Are you saying you're resigning, sir?" Elijah's eyes flicked toward Marcus. The boy's expression was unreadable, half pride, half grief. When Elijah looked back at the crowd, his voice carried a finality that left no doubt. Yes, effective immediately. Gasps erupted. Dozens of reporters shouted at once, but Elijah raised a hand, silencing them. I will no longer lead an institution that punishes truth. I'm stepping down and calling for the immediate arrest of Sergeant Thomas Rayner. The room exploded. Cameras clicked like gunfire, questions overlapping. Is there a warrant? What evidence do you have? Will others face charges? Elijah didn't answer. He simply turned from the podium, the storm of voices behind him fading into a blur. Outside, the chants began again, louder this time, echoing off every wall. Justice for Marcus. Justice for all. That night, the city burned with light. Every major network replayed the press conference, dissecting every word. The department headquarters, once untouchable, became a fortress under siege. Federal investigators arrived before dawn, their black sedans lined along the curb. Files were seized. Officers questioned. In a quiet apartment across town, Rayner watched the footage in disbelief. His lawyer's phone call had woken him minutes earlier, but the screen told him what words couldn't. His name, his face, his past, all exposed. This is bad, Tom, the lawyer said, pacing behind him. Federal oversight means they'll go through everything. Even cases we thought were sealed. Rayner turned, his eyes wild. You said the union would protect me. The lawyer hesitated. The union protects the system. You're not the system anymore. The words landed like a verdict. Rayner sank into his chair, staring blankly at the wall. By morning, the city's air was electric with tension. Officers whispered in corridors, shredding documents, wiping hard drives. Some quietly packed their desks, others pretended nothing had changed. The old code of silence was collapsing, replaced by fear. Inside the commissioner's office, Elijah sat across from a group of stern-faced federal agents. Agent Crawford, the same man who'd called him days ago, placed a folder on the table. We've reviewed the recovered footage from Rayner's bodycam, he said. It confirms excessive force. But that's not all. He slid a still image across the table. It showed another officer standing behind Rayner during the assault, his badge barely visible. Officer Grant Mason. Your internal files list him as a witness in 2 prior use-of-force investigations, both dismissed under your oversight. Elijah's stomach turned. You're saying I signed off on him too? Crawford nodded. It's a pattern, and the press conference gave us the leverage to dig deeper. You might have just cracked this department wide open for the first time. Elijah didn't feel vindicated, only hollow. He had built the machine that was now being dismantled. 2 days later, Rayner was escorted through the precinct in handcuffs. The irony was suffocating. The same hallways where he'd strutted with arrogance now echoed with the shuffle of his chains. Cameras flashed through the glass doors as reporters shouted his name. Sergeant Rayner, do you have anything to say to the Hale family? He kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched, but his composure faltered when he passed a bulletin board still pinned with department commendations, including one signed by Elijah Hale. The ink from his own past stared back at him like judgment. Across the street, Elijah watched from a black sedan. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. Watching Rayner's figure disappear into the building, he felt no triumph, only a quiet ache. Justice was being served, but it came far too late. Weeks passed. Investigations spread beyond the department, reaching City Hall. The same officials who once begged Elijah to keep it quiet now pleaded ignorance. Several resigned. Others were subpoenaed. And through it all, Elijah remained silent. His days were filled with hearings, his nights with restless sleep. Marcus, however, found his way back to the one thing that had always grounded him, art. Though his hands still trembled, he returned to the alley wall where his last mural had been defaced. It took weeks, but he painted again. Each stroke was slow, deliberate, a hand breaking free from chains, light pouring through the cracks. One evening, long after the news vans had vanished, Elijah visited the site. The alley smelled faintly of paint, thinner, and rain. Marcus was there, crouched with a brush, lost in thought. The mural glowed faintly under a flickering street lamp. You still believe in this city? Elijah asked quietly, his voice echoing off brick. Marcus didn't turn immediately. He rinsed his brush, watching color swirl in the puddle at his feet. No, Dad, he said at last, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I believe in what it could be. Elijah stepped closer, the words sinking deep. The boy who had nearly died because of his silence was now painting hope where fear once lived. For the first time in months, Elijah felt something shift inside him, a fragile beginning. He looked up at the mural again. The light from the painted hand stretched across the wall like dawn. Behind him, the city hummed, broken, bruised, but still breathing. He didn't know if it could ever truly change, but as Marcus continued painting, each stroke steady and sure, Elijah realized that maybe change didn't start with systems at all. It started with confession, with courage, with the choice to face what was broken instead of hiding it. He lingered a while longer before finally turning away, leaving father and son's shadows cast together against the wall, a silhouette of what was lost and what might still be rebuilt. The irony was complete. The man who once defended the system had been forced to destroy it to save his son, and in doing so, began to rebuild it from the ashes. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of racial prejudice, extreme police brutality, and the severe consequences of violence against a minor. This narrative aims to highlight the importance of dignity and accountability, showing that professional status should never be used to commit assault.